Do you for some reason like theory, but also you like art? Well then, this might be the video for you. This one is all about bringing theory to life through the medium of film. Helen Rollins is a filmmaker, as is Will Proudler. Very, very excited for you all to be able to see this. It's a fantastic conversation that we hosted here at Theory Underground not very long ago during an epic marathon live stream. Helen Rollins is a friend of the channel. Will is a member of Theory Underground, one of the members of the ongoing research seminar that I do with my wife, Anne Snellgrove McKerracher. We have this thing called the Snellgrove-McKerracher synthesis. It's absolutely fantastic. You should get involved. Getting involved gives you a big discount on all the courses going on. And before I turn it over here, I just want to make a quick plug to say, hey, you know what? If you're into Helen Rollins' work, you might be into this course that's coming up in the month of October here at Theory Underground. It's Introduction to Marxism with Chris Catrone. Chris Catrone of the Platypus Affiliated Society. Chris Catrone, the last Marxist. Come and hear it from the horse's mouth yourselves. The last Marxist on Introduction to Marxism. It doesn't get much better than that. Very excited to kick that thing off pretty soon here. So sign up today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over here to our conversation with Helen and Will. Enjoy. And we're back. Welcome everybody to Theory Underground. This is a portion of an epic marathon live stream happening on August 14th, which is for me a Wednesday. I think that's for all of us. We've got from Britain 2 people joining us to talk about theory and film. Helen Rollins, return guest, friend of the show, and Will, who actually we met in London at the London event that we did with Helen and Nina over at Pierre's place. So it's so great to have you both back. How you doing?
Okay. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm doing fine, apart from the heat, but we're kind of like, both me and Helen we've got our ginger or whatever we're using to kind of help it out. So yeah, it's all good.
Navigating the horrendous. Yeah, we're not used to this. It's been really hot here for the last few days, so we were just complaining. You guys were like, you know nothing.
I mean, if we accept the fact that there's a gradual transition from moderate weather to extreme heat for Nance in Phoenix, then I think it's true that you all are suffering worse, even though it's not as bad technically on a thermometer.
And I'm used to it. It's like it's all as it should be, that it's so hot. It is out of the norm for you guys. And you don't have air conditioning.
I did spend a summer in Phoenix once, or like how much, like a month of a summer. It was, you know.
It's good for you. It builds character.
Brutal.
Yeah.
I was asking you both behind closed doors there because we had just had the conversation with Christine Louis Desaulles if either of you feel particularly British or have British values, because that's kind of the conversation we were just having. But you know, that's all. Joking aside, I actually want to get into what I see to be the core of your work, which is film and theory and bringing ideas to life and teaching concepts through film. And it's too bad that I didn't have a chance between yesterday and today to watch all of Helen's films, because I thought in just like my dumb brain that those must be somewhere, you know, sequestered away behind some paywall, and eventually I'd come around to getting it. But Will was like, no, I watched it all on her website. You didn't know? I was like, she has a website? And I was like, oh my God. And so I was going to watch it and then I didn't get around to it. But I was thinking, Will, maybe you could share just a little bit about your take, your perspective on what it is that she's been doing, like some of your favorite work or some of the questions that you've come up with. And then maybe that'll set Helen up to talk a little bit about her approach.
So I kind of the favorite film that I really liked was Making Love, and I thought that was just a fantastic film. I've kind of watched it 3 times over now, and I think it's really one of those fantastic pieces that kind of lends itself to that. And I felt it was your piece that kind of attached itself most to Lacanian theory for me, and obviously it was kind of very, very obvious from the beginning. And I was kind of like wondering when I was watching it, like, how do you start actually getting into making a project like this? Do you actually start with like a specific seminar? Are you like translating it into images? Or are you so stained with Lacan that it's just like all of your film ideas are just Lacanian?
Oh, no, that's so interesting. Yeah. No,
Mm.
that was such a fun one to make. And to be honest, okay, so this is where material reality blends with like, as in we are our material reality. I've been thinking a lot about like Bourdieu recently, and this idea of like what you desire to do is really framed by your material conditions, you know, so you come to desire what you're sort of forced to desire. And also there's the other thing in the Lacan sense of like who you brush up against the dialectic subjectivity of your parents and that contingent setup that you're born into, and that frames. So we really don't choose. So I always find it interesting when, you know, and I think like I did a literature degree, so I also get and I appreciate it, but like there's often this tendency to kind of like well, I guess, you know, like the death of the author thing, you know, there is a separate thing where a work of art becomes its own thing, which I also really appreciate as an idea, because that really captures the fact that like substance is subject. Whenever we generate a piece of work, by definition, because we're in a dialectical universe, it is more than the sum of its parts, because that's the nature of reality. You know, we can maybe conceptualize in a logical way that only holds a certain form of logic, but there's all sorts of things that come into it. And so materially, like, you know, you have your set of ideas, and then when you film it, you have all these other people you're working with, and generally they all come with their ideas, and it actually builds it and becomes more complex and kind of better and all this kind of stuff. But just in terms of like doing these ideas-based films, I actually like really didn't start out wanting or knowing that I would end up doing that. I think like I had I actually went really biographical on your last stream about university and how I like left academia and sort of really turned my back on it and was like, oh, you know, fuck you. But then I also sort of have always really, you know, had these ideas and been into ideas. So I think it was always kind of inevitable. And then my collaborative partner that I started working with for a long period of time was and is a philosopher. And he had a facility at that time to raise money, and it's very difficult to raise money in film. So that particular project and some of the projects that we've done, and it's interesting because obviously we live in capitalism, we live and breathe capitalism. Capitalist logic is antithetical to the logic of art. So in a sense, you have to kind of like, whenever you're pitching, especially to institutions, especially to government institutions in Europe that have their own set of policies, which are really egregious actually in terms of the way capitalism is going, but maybe unconscious of it because, you know, it's rare to be able to have the facility to self-reflect under capitalism. And so there's an investment in a form of logic, which is the perfect foil to that sort of economic drive. And it's a very oppositional logic. It's a very problem solution logic. Art itself, art is art insofar as it houses contradiction. It's ambivalent. It's a technology in a sense that humans have produced that confronts us with our reality and the fact that reality is substance and subject. If it doesn't do that, it's propaganda, and we know what it is. So whenever you pitch something, you write a log line or anything like that, it's like you can't comprehend the totality of what you're doing, partly because you can't, but also because because it will become something else, but also because the artwork itself, if it's going to be art, is ambivalent. But, you know, the operational weaponized logic of capitalism, which is lack and complete, like lack is contingent and it can be transcendently completed by the commodity or problem solution, you know, kind of goes against that. But, you know, it's interesting because you always need money. You can, as you get maybe more experienced, you know, work out, navigate your resources and work out ways to make films for less. But obviously you have to pay the people you're collaborating with, you have to survive, and you have, you know, if you're making it, it does actually demand money. So this isn't to say that this was like a kind of commercial reason to do it, but I was lucky enough at that time, as I was like, that was my second narrative film, to be able to work alongside Pete's project, which again, it's not his isn't necessarily, I would call it like a philosophy or ideas project, but it's a Lacanian project. And it's about creating, he would call it transformance art, but pockets of life through community, he call it communion, like what you guys are doing, where you can be confronted with the dialectical nature of desire, which is an antithetical kind of impetus to capitalism, which we're stuck in. But there, you know, we have to be honest and say we're navigating capitalism. So I think I originally would have probably thought, you know, like everybody else who's naive and starts making film, like, oh, I'll just make art for art's sake, and oh, I'll make something that's really popular. And it's, but you know, it was ever thus, it's really difficult. But B, you know, the economic conditions have got worse and worse and worse. It's really, really hard. But we were really lucky to collaborate and to basically share a sort of perspective. And he had, you know, from that film, we actually raised the money on Kickstarter, which was like really, really lucky. And so that film, actually, I think we conceived of it as, and I think this has meant it's kind of quite difficult, you know, just for a mainstream audience to position something like this. But I would say it really is like a deliberately ideas-based film. I think you can watch it just, you know, for the entertainment value. It still has that kind of, it was deliberately that kind of sort of semi-thriller-esque erotic romance structure that kind of brings you in. I think it's really important to do that. I think actually that's what makes film political and powerful, is that it is the way it's developed is it confronts the viewer with their desire. And then we can maybe use that technology to do something interesting, but it creates a process, I would say like a shorthand psychoanalytic process in terms of like the actual clinic of confronting us with our desire. And I think actually those kinds of narratives that maybe mark like Hollywood films, but we can do them in really interesting ways. And it's not just Hollywood that uses, you know, novel, it's a tale as old as time, these kinds of stories, but it like, so you can just watch it and enjoy it, I think, unless, you know, people maybe don't enjoy whatever, they can have their own views because artists are. But I guess we were conceiving it of, not to be like super pretentious, because I know that we'd be never reach the heights of this, but obviously in the 20th century, in the mid-20th century, you have lots of people who were writing theory and philosophy who were dabbling in novels and plays and stuff. So you have things like No Exit by Sartre, you have novels by Camus and stuff like that. So I think when we were making it, we were thinking, you know, how do we do this kind of project? So it still has to work, you know, you can't just, it's not like a lecture or anything like that. It has to work as a film. But so that was very long-winded. But again, I just want to reiterate, like it is really difficult to find ways to navigate practically the world. And then I think this contingent thing of being able to make films in this way had its hand in shaping what I ended up doing. Yeah.
I found that the film definitely work on that level. Like I was watching it through the first time, and it does feel like kind of like a normal kind of erotic thriller, like a film, but it almost inspires you to be reflective on the film itself. Like you almost want to go back and watch it again. And I feel like that's very Lacanian. I don't know. But I was very inspired by what you were talking about in terms of, I feel that theory and film have kind of like detached themselves from each other. And you do have these people who are making films today on these very kind of important topics, but they're not really engaged with theory that much.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I mean, I'm very interested in your new book, actually, and it's a shame I didn't get a chance to kind of like read it before I made the film, because you're kind of talking about kind of like reductivist kind of ideas of psychoanalysis in film. And I was kind of a bit interested of what those are for you and how that appears in film today.
No, it's so interesting what you said. I think you make a really good point about the, you know, the separation of theory and film. And, you know, and I do think this is to do with of our reality and this sort of, because to really do philosophy and to really do theory, and this is kind of what I talk about in the book, it's very different from what Lacan calls the university discourse. And in a sense, which he claims is like, so he had this thing called the four discourses, which he developed after what he saw as the failure of the revolution of 68 amongst the students at universities, and how a lot of these sort of self-confident discourses can hide the capitalist discourse in disguise, or the master's discourse. So often, like the university, if we think about it in like, and we've talked about this loads on Theory Underground, about like, you know, back in the day, the medieval time, and it was monks who were doing studies. It's like they were given time to just be able to reflect. And it's very different being in a neoliberal university where you have to hit targets and preconceived, you know, you have all this proliferation of, instead of these former subjects where you might have done like the philosophy of women within philosophy, or, you know, things like that. You have a studies thing, which is in a sense is like potentially, I'm not saying that it all is this, but like a preconceived set of ideas that have developed, you know, rather than it being like an exploration. We don't know what the conclusion is. Some of these degrees you go and you know what you're going to get. And so it's very difficult to do actual kind of philosophy within the neoliberal institution of any kind. There's plenty of people that are doing what Lacan would, it's kind of confusing because he's using the word university discourse, but that's a sort of almost disparaging term of what can happen when you're using the confidence of critique to mystify actually a capitalist logic or a master's discourse logic.
I'm wondering,
passionate about that.
Oh shit.
And this isn't to be like critique of like film theory as such. I think film theory is really good. And as I said, I really appreciate, you know, the study of film and the study of art and the study of literature from that literary studies perspective. But what kind of happened in the 70s, and we've talked about this, I'm sure, loads on Theory Underground, is you have like a bit of time where people are kind of coming up with secondary and tertiary readings of the original texts. And you have ideas that really take off. And often ideas that really take off, unfortunately, they're ideas that are, you know, amenable to the progress of capitalism. So one of those ideas is this idea of gaze and what gaze means. And I think for Lacan, gaze is a very universal subject. It's very ambivalent. It's pointing out the lack in desire in the visual field, the confrontation with the fact that we are divided, the universe is divided. And it actually became a sort of way to, so a lot of Lacan's ideas that are potentially quite, appear quite mystified, but actually it's their ambivalence and complexity that allows them to sort of carry this possibility, this kind of infinite possibility. And there's a sort of an attempt to lock it down and using ideas or sort of scientific sounding psychoanalytic ideas to justify a political perspective. I mean, I use the word political. I personally would say an apolitical perspective, because I actually think politics is always the tarrying with the multiplicity of the desire of those who live within a group, two or more people. And so this, by definition, demands a multiplicity and holding space for this multiplicity of perspectives. So I often think that what we think is political or party political, all this kind of thing, is actually a turn away. So like an affirmation of a certain ideological position that we demand to be true, and that necessitates an enemy who doesn't agree with us, behind whom we can imagine. This isn't all of these perspectives, but it's some, you know, at its worst, let's say, being ungenerous, you know, that we imagine that, like, instead of confronting the material reality, the base of the economy, the actual political of the commons, we kind of, in a sort of PTSD sense, are traumatized by the very toxic nature of the world we've created, because we haven't had the capacity to confront the real of where we, you know, how we live. We don't want to confront that, and so we imagine that if only we fix these little things and these ideas, then that world that's actually creating the problems, we could live in it, would be perfect. But because that's impossible, that's a utopic vision, we live in a complex, contradictory universe in which we have to constantly, as Marx would say, pick the living flower, confront the real of our situation. We sustain that vision of possibility behind somebody who doesn't agree with us. So I think what then happened is some of those positions, which actually, I don't think at the original time, let's say in the 70s, embodied that kind of logic, but came to as certain ideas became received as sort of righteous and unquestionable. And then those become the perfect foils and cover stories and become part of this university discourse that sort of righteously disguises the capitalist discourse. And I think using some of these like ideas that maybe seem, you know, you hear a psychoanalytic idea and it sounds like something scientific and real. And in a sense, it is an attempt to sort of like describe reality. I think Freud, what he was doing when he sort of discovered the unconscious was to create a material reading of subjectivity, which I think is really important to remember. But I think that what then happened is you have a certain like reading of these ideas that are actually much more ambivalent, much more universalist, much more to do with lack and contradiction, being brought in a certain direction affirming a preconceived position. And then we lost this sort of more, not to sound too like mystical about it, but this huge potential opening up of thinking about what a film, what art, what literature could be via Lacan. And I think for me, what interests me personally, I'm not saying it's at all the only way to read film. I think it's maybe because I'm a practitioner that like this is the take that I have. And I think like people from all kinds of positions could read Lacan or use Lacan in their reading of what art is. And as I say, I just think like this is one reading. And I think that like this multiplicity has been lost because of this confidence of like, and this happens in capitalism all the time, you pick one star idea and the surplus, everybody else's ideas that don't catch on, become what are actually materially that which gives this singular idea value, but actually potentially it's just an idea like everything else. So the take that I have is that what if instead of it just being like we're going to read a film, we're going to read what was going on in the director's mind and what this symbolizes, and this green bush represents, this snake represents. I actually think it's interesting to think about film as potentially psychoanalytic as an act. So, and it's interesting, I sometimes think that like when you say this, I remember saying this at a conference with, I think, a lot of literary people. It was like, what? You can't do that. But it's like, well, okay, maybe
Yeah,
not. But
says?
Also you can, because words exist. And like I'm just saying that what if we actually think of what, if like, and I think also that there's the difference between the theory and the practice of psychoanalysis. And sometimes there's like a bit of a conflict. And I would be guilty because I'm obviously not a psychoanalytic practitioner. So that's like obviously different when you're just sort of thinking about it. But I do think that there are interesting similarities between the underlying confrontation with the direction and the dynamic of the unconscious in the clinic and what film can and could do. And I think, therefore, it's like, sublation, right? This is an existing technology with all its problems. And, obviously there's this criticism of like plotted, riven Hollywood films being really problematic and capitalist. But can we sublate the existing technologies and think about, because it's never the actual object, the tool that's necessarily the problem. I mean, that's very reductive, because it is true that there are problematic tools and that capitalism generates problems. And this isn't to say that on the other side of capitalism there's a perfect utopia, but the thing is, it's like, can we think about the act of film, the practical object of film, the subject of film differently, basically?
Yeah, because I feel like with film, you get these kind of, it allows the outside in a way. Do you know what I mean? You're watching a film and you lose yourself. I mean, I don't know if you ever come out of a film and felt like the main character. I mean, it's such a transformation experience. It's a really, really powerful thing.
So definitely. I wanted to do a couple of things here in our last 27 minutes, and I think we have time to do all of those things and more. And a couple of those things. One will be, I definitely want to hear Nance's thoughts so far. I really look forward to how this is going to provoke a lot of thinking in both the movie connoisseurs, film buffs at Theory Underground, as well as the people who kind of, like me, have avoided such circles for a long time because I just don't. I go to a movie for escape. I like pure ideology. Yeah. I think it's fine to have some
ideology.
Like, it's okay, Yeah. But I am as a YouTuber in part. I'm not just a YouTuber, but I do put stuff out on this platform. Always kind of like, what if I did that? What if I did this? And I want to kind of inspire, through you both, others to think about the kinds of things that you can do. Anyone can start a YouTube channel. Everyone has a smartphone. Great films have been recorded on shittier cameras. Great films have been recorded on iPhones. And so there's a lot of really great opportunities for us. And Will is sort of pioneering or spearheading that effort from the Theory Underground membership. As far as the members at TU goes, he's the one who's working on 2 films at the moment, at least.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And one film is what he calls a psychoanalysis, what do you call it, machine?
Simulator. A Lacanian
Simulator.
psychoanalysis simulator. Yeah.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah. And I
Sorry,
think
go ahead.
that's the natural segue from what
Yeah.
Helen was just talking about. And then we can also talk about the idea of bringing the concept of time energy to life for people who aren't ever going to read the book. And so, but let's start with what is that simulator? And
so it was basically an idea I'd started having because I was reading a lot of case studies of Lacan, and I was like, oh, these are fascinating. These are kind of great texts. And they also kind of show you a lot about what the psychoanalyst is thinking at the same time. And so I kind of thought, I kind of want to problematize the kind of normal theory kind of therapist kind of film or TV show that you have. And I wanted to kind of go inside the psychoanalyst's head. And so you essentially sit in the psychoanalyst's head, and you almost get like an Alan Bennett talking heads monologue, where you've got this person kind of talking about their life and different notes are kind of popping up. And then the other half of the film is a bit more like a kind of noir detective story, where the psychoanalyst is kind of like coming up with what the patient is and what's wrong with them and things like that. And I just felt like it was kind of like an interesting way of kind of, again, problematizing that kind of normal thing that we think psychoanalysis is. And one of the best things that kind of happened through it is I've kind of been showing a few test screenings to people who don't know Lacan, and they've kind of been talking about like Lacanian things, even though they didn't really know. And I think that's one of the most powerful things for me. It's kind of it's bringing it to people who are never going to read the Acree, which is a really, really big thing to do. And I think it's something kind of you're interested in as well, Helen. I'm not sure.
It's interesting because, like, I think, obviously there is often like, some
I be living on me to the very end. I'm my own best friend. Spread my wings and I'll fly to the end.
Can we
Better
one
know
day?
my worth.
Yeah.
Swaying to this melody, dancing with
Got a little sound.
serenity, blocking all bad energy. Sometimes
I think that's a really good point you say, definitely. And I think like I'm with vulgarization, like I think it's actually like there is this such a difference between the theory itself. And because I think when things are true, they're understandable, right? And like if I can see like the way that his
spread my wings and I'll fly to the ends of
takes
the
place.
earth.
It's sort
Better
of a sort
know
of
my
sideways,
worth.
unusual approach, but that's necessarily
Dancing with serenity,
understood what they're like.
energy.
How your things are coming through to.
I have no idea what just happened. Hold on, everybody. What is that? What is that music? Where's that music coming from? I have no idea where that music's coming from. What the hell?
Someone's watching you. Someone's it's the return.
But yeah,
What
I
the
think
hell?
that's a great point.
No, it's not going to
About the
stop.
fact that-
I'll just mute myself. All right.
Okay.
I think that's a great point you make about the fact that, these things are understandable. And that's what I got from the text. I mean, I first started kind of reading Lacan and not understanding anything, but there's just this moment where you explode and you go, actually, this is really simple. It's kind of talking about stuff that we do every day that, and you can apply it to everybody. So that's what's great.
Definitely. And I also sort of feel like there's
Hello, beautiful listener. I see you. Just kidding. I can't. But I have to interrupt this just really quick to make my own advertisement, my very own, the one that says subscribing, liking, commenting. It actually makes a really big difference. So even if you're just on the free side, shout out to you. Thanks for doing it. Make sure to subscribe and all that. Especially people on the podcast, make sure to say something nice in the reviews. It actually really helps. And I need reviews on every platform, all right? Because I just hate to say it, it matters, I try not to chase the almighty algorithm, but also I don't want to have all of this beautiful content go to waste. And so I'm trying to walk a fine line between quality and quantity. And I come out way heavier on the side of quality, as you can obviously see we do here. But come on, let's let's push that subscribe button, let's smash that like button, teach the algorithm what you actually care about. All right. And then maybe it'll show it to other people. That's great. All right, let's get back to it.
It's kind of talking about stuff that we do every day that, and you can apply it to everybody. So that's what's great.
Definitely. And I also sort of feel like there's I also kind of feel that there's a way in which let's say bourgeois education, I mean, I use that word in terms of like capitalist, whatever, the capitalist mode, educates us out of, our reality. And so sometimes when you show a film like this to people who are very, let's say, confident in their position that they have the right take and they're well educated, and actually I think it shows something quite powerful, because it's often not that it's like not liked or whatever. It's sort of like computer abort. It's like, you can't do this. This isn't, but, and of course I kind of get it, because we have a very kind of competitive industrial landscape across all jobs, and it's more and more of us are proletarianized. We're the surplus contributors, we're the surplus, educated, or the surplus worker or whatever, and so we're kind of forced into making sure we always think the right way for the market and stuff. And that, obviously capitalism, it's one of its principal toxicities is the assumption or the lie that it is completely neutral. It's a universal system and we will have equal access to the market. And then when you're coming, because I think really the issue is with Lacan, and what makes it not understandable, but also on the same side, very understandable, is that it describes something about subjectivity, which in all of its ambivalence and complexity stands outside the logic of the market. So it's difficult insofar as it doesn't jive with ideology, unless it's sort of maybe interpreted in singular directions, so then read and reread, and then it becomes the words, detached so far from maybe what was originally intended, if that can be said at all. But actually it does describe something that we are all embodying every day, and we have this constant antagonism between the nature of our subjectivity and the economic and ideological universe in which we're thrown. And I think sometimes, because we have to do such a good job of repressing that contradiction, and we're not supposed to acknowledge it, it can be really uncomfortable. It's amazing how powerfully this, can be. Films are supposed to do this. Corporate films, commoditized films are supposed to give you completion in your desire, or it's supposed to leave the illusion that even though the character hasn't got what they want contingently in this moment, they will. And so to not do that, it's often confronting. But the fact that it can rile one so much says something about, it's pointing to a discomfort in the contradiction that we always have to bear between how we are embodied and how we experience our embodiment and our self-consciousness, and how we have to repress that reality in order to participate in the market. But I think more people are experiencing that because material conditions are getting worse, so you just can't ignore it anymore.
Yeah. I felt like that was one of the things in Making Love, where you almost were like problematizing desire. Like it made desire into this very strange thing that also felt kind of very, very human at the same time. And I kind of feel like I completely agree with you. Like I felt like through film and the history of film, we were meant to have all these different voices come in. Women, different minorities were meant to come in and change kind of how film was done and the structure of film. And they kind of get like one film to do that with, and it's like the first film, and then suddenly they get swallowed by the machine and they're just making the same structure. So I don't know, do you think that, would you call your film kind of a Lacanianly structured? Do you think you were thinking about like how you're going to change that structure for kind of thinking about Lacan?
Yeah, no, it's actually really interesting, because in the passage of my book I talk about Andre Bazin and this guy Noel Birch, who was and how Noel Birch, I think, and Bazin had these similar readings where they're slightly different, but like basically it's like the more realistic, the better. And we're going to explode as society advances. I mean, this is really reductive, and so I apologize don't at me. I'm just trying to make a point. So yes, I admit this is like really, but I do go into my book. But basically that, either the more realistic and true to reality, so just like, there was a big thing in the 19th century, I actually can't remember who said it, like might have been Flaubert, but like these different theories about, a novel is like carrying a mirror across like I did this as like my second year undergrad degree in French literature, so I can't fucking remember, but then other people were saying like, no, it's much more, it's the lives, all this kind of stuff. So but the other idea is that that there would be this change in the structure as we became more progressive and enlightened, and it wouldn't be so restrictive, and it would be more kind of like airy fairy. But I actually feel like whilst I appreciate poetic films, and I've made poetic kind of films myself, or video art, and also things like films that are more wishy-washy in their narrative structure, I think that's also great. That's nothing to, and that's not necessarily commoditizable, but what I think is a commoditizable idea is that is liberating, because the liberational idea can always be capitalized upon, because, and this is the real problem, this is our conundrum, because as soon as we promise something, that's the commodity logic is that you can be transcendently assuaged in your lack, which is contingent by the commodity. So if you're promising like this is going to so that's kind of a difficult thing we always have to tarry with. But I actually think that it's precisely, and I think this is how the difference between therapy culture and psychoanalysis is, it actually, you go into psychoanalysis believing that this person knows something that you don't, and that this is going to cure you. And the cure itself is only in being let down and realizing that the big other is also divided. And I think the thing is, therefore, it's a transference question. So we have to use, I think, this kind of, and this is just one person thinking about it. I'm sure there's probably loads of people who are kind of thinking about it in different ways. But you have to, I think, because desire, as like Freud says, you can't just like think your way to the cure. This is always operating, and as Chris Davis says, like the imminent transcendence of life is that we're remembering, forgetting, like our desires and our drives overcome us. That like it's trying to do something. If we can, like, the transference always sort of works because we are desiring beings, we are sort of deluded beings, and I think that ribbon structure, which
I'm a little worried that this is my internet dropping frames.
Got to be more structured. You got to be more structured. So maybe it's just again like that. I actually think that we can sublate that, because basically by using the structure, that the viewer transferentially invests. Like the character starts off, they've lost something, they go on a journey and the viewer, as you said, this is something that I think is really important. It shows the divided nature of our subjectivity and the divided nature of others, like the the atom with a missing electron that like can connect with another. It's that we always invest in a character, no matter their race, their age. We can invest in a 90-year-old grandpa or a baby. So, that's a really important fact to say. But I also just wanted to make, reiterate what you were saying about the identity political idea that just by, and this is like the real cope of capitalism, right? It's like just by, and it's the commodity logic of subjectivity. So the individual has been commoditized as a purchasable object because they are somebody who embodies an identity which endows them with some kind of knowledge which is hidden from us. It's very much the Victorian colonialist El Dorado logic, the racist, orientalist and infantilizing logic, which is like this other person who is transcendentally different from me, which is the racist lie. And I know that I'll really be interested in listening back to Christine's talk, because I know she was talking like what universalism might look like. So much of what the universalism, the capitalists themselves us, is absolutely not that. So this person who has this experience can teach us something transcendentally different, and they'll come along. And it's also like to demand that, like, say, a woman's going to come along. And this was this question of female and male gaze that I have like a real issue with, and that they're transcendently different. It's like, yes, that like Can did talk about sexuation and different ways of desiring, and sexuation is not tied to biological sex. It is and it isn't at the same time. It can be, it cannot be. But we also are marked by something more than that, which is lack, and that's universal. So to say that somebody's got to come along and like invent because of their identity a different form of film is crazy. But also, and it's this commodity logic, and it's this N+1 thing of we have this situation, we can, edge our way to a it's the capitalist bad infinite. But what is actually really interesting is if you've ever done a film which happens to be like, I just feel like films are film. I'm making a documentary at the moment about one of the longest surviving people with AIDS, and he's an absolutely amazing story and a really amazing individual. And he passed away, unfortunately, just after we recorded his interview. But like when we were trying to kind of get mainstream pitching and maybe like get distribution before we made the project, there was this often refrain, and I know like this isn't, you shouldn't read too much into any of these things because there's also wider things like the collapse in streamers and stuff, so there's very few opportunities anyway, but it was just interesting because what often happens, if you're making a film which you might think is just a film, because it's about a person, and every film has the capacity to have this universalist like approach, and anybody can identify with these people on a certain level. I do not deny that people have different experiences, and we have to take that into account, and we have to like, you know, reckon with historical injustices and stuff like that. But as you point out, subjectivity is divided in everybody, and that's actually what makes it possible for us to get beyond that. So, and I say beyond, I mean like sublate, as in when this is not like an emancipatory promise, it's like an ordinary unhappiness promise, anti-promise, you know, disappointment. But basically it'll be like, oh, we made a film about gay people last year. So it's like this tokenistic thing of like, whilst it's, you know, it's the pink washing, it's the green washing, it's an N+1 logic where it's like, you know, this is an object. It is A equals A, right? It represents itself. We all know what this signifier means. Instead of like a Lacanian approach would be like, the signifier is not at one with itself. This film basically is exploding the signifier, is exploring the like contradictory nature of the signifier. And instead it's like, this icon is that which it says it is. And I find that actually a very offensive, it can be a very racist, it can be a very like transphobic, it can be a very anti-humanist like logic. And this isn't to blame anybody, because actually nobody's really blamable, it's the material conditions. But it's just interesting that what tends to happen, and I know like some of my friends who maybe happen to be of certain identities which have been appealed to by this logic, which by the way in the arts is really operationalized both because of the competitive nature of it. Like so many of us went to university and had all these aspirations, so they can take their pick and then they can make ourselves, commoditize ourselves, and do the emotional labor of having the right form of ideas to be picked. But also because the righteousness of this approach, this university discourse approach, mystifies the material conditions that have eroded the filmmaking landscape for everybody. Yeah,
I think that's fantastic. That's fantastic. That's definitely what I've experienced as well. It's just that, you know, in the industry, I feel like people almost just feel so stifled nowadays, and they feel like they can't make things, and they feel like they can't get anything funded. And so it's really like, it almost doesn't matter what you're going to say, because no one will listen and no one really cares. So you kind of got to, I mean, because a lot of my films are kind of like, I do it a bit underground, I'm a bit punk. I just kind of like, a lot of my friends are actors and things like that. So we just kind of pull together to try and kind of like avoid those material conditions in a way. So we don't have to actually engage with them too much. But yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, I'm not sure if like Nance has any questions, or Dave, and I don't want to take the whole floor.
What I want to say real quick for everybody.
Oh no, now Dave has frozen. I
can hear you. Let me.
Daddy's left the building.
His internet's struggling right now.
I hear you guys.
I know. I like listening to you talk. Oh, you're.
Yeah, guys. So let me just talk for a second really quick, just to say that the internet started taking like this really, the internet's been taking this really rocky boom, 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 like dive bomb, and it's bottoming out, which is crazy because I pay for super high speed internet. But it is important to say, if you are in the audience, we will hopefully have this worked out in the next 15 minutes. And also, that the recorded version of this will more or less have its integrity. And so if there are parts missing on the live side, just know that there will be the whole thing will be up later as a standalone. So yeah, it's kind of killing me, but I'm going to turn it back over here to you guys. Just know it'll work out. It'll work out.
Maybe we should talk about, I know Dave, you were saying about like maybe YouTube production and like what people can do themselves. And was that a topic we were gonna?
Yeah.
I know Will was talking about it just a second ago. I mean, I don't know. I think the thing is, things are so changing so much. And I think like I started making films in like about 10 years ago, and it was a very different economic moment to today. You know, different opportunities, probably more opportunities. And And it really is interesting how things have changed, and then obviously like how that's going to affect media production. There's also this question of like, you know, when we're making things like, are we always generating value for our like social media overlords and stuff like that? But again, maybe this is a sublation question of like, we can use the resources that exist and the platforms that exist to generate these moments of like, what if, like, you know, what if we looked at these things differently? And I think the thing is, it's like, what I feel is really important about what you guys do and about thinking in general is, and I say this as somebody who felt like really resentful of the way that millennial education had gone, and we were also overeducated and all this kind of stuff. But actually having these places just to think and to talk and to philosophize, right, is it almost a protest? Because so much of our universe where things are so commoditized, our subjectivity itself is being commoditized, like the culture wars generate so much value for tech. And, you know, just to have these conversations is already a protest. But I also feel that, and I think like one of the, I was doing a stream with Cadell the other day about what maybe like Hegel would have thought about are the primary contradictions of our condition. Obviously, Marx was talking about these economic conditions and almost extending Hegel, but you know, in terms of subjectivity and in terms of like where commodity logic ends up with subjectivity and that like the commodification of the commons. But I guess almost already just by engaging in ideas, this will affect your work, because it's almost impossible. Like, again, you can't rationalize your way to the cure, but by doing it, by dint of doing it, it's like a practice. And I sort of think like it almost becomes impossible. Like, however much you intend to do things, when you do your art, it just comes out in a certain way, what you're thinking about. It's not even what you're thinking about, it's like how you live in the world, how your subjectivity sits in the world. And I think we're probably going to see more and more films by people who are experiencing, especially people who maybe had aspirations when the economy was at a certain point that have changed and have been really confronted with their material conditions. We might get more films that explore that. We might get more films that challenge the status quo because they're looking at what resources they can use and how they can kind of navigate what exists in a kind of bricolage and, as you say, punk approach. So yeah, I almost think that like, I also, having done like loads of podcasts for a long period of time, it's like, am I doing too much podcasting, too much thinking, not enough art? But as my husband always says, it's like, that's what actually makes your work what it is. So I think that just like as artists, by engaging in this kind of stuff, that can actually transform our output without even thinking about it.
Because I feel like that it's almost becoming very democratic film, because the whole film industry is kind of collapsing a little bit. But we've got all these tools that we can use ourselves, and you know, we can get a bunch of friends together and make a film that's actually not too far away from a Hollywood film if you're kind of talented enough. And I was reading the other day about someone who was working on advertising kind of film sets and things like that. And they've just seen kind of the team reduce and reduce and reduce. And now most of them's just like one person with an iPhone, and they're working for these big ad companies. So I feel like, you know, no one's going to have a job in a way, and it will be very sad for a bit, but soon kind of that level playing field will just kind of grow all these different kinds of cinema, kinds of work.
No, it is absolutely really interesting. And I think that there's you know, obviously proletarianization is like, you know, it's interesting because, you know, there's obviously the accelerationist argument about capitalism and all this kind of stuff. But the thing that does worry me is like, as things come to a grinding halt, as the rate of profit is like nearly zero, how can we make sure that people don't unnecessarily suffer? You know, that's what I think is really, really important. But, you know, there are so many, you know, as we've said with this notion of surplus value and surplus genius on other podcasts, it's like there are a lot of really talented people out there. And I think the thing is, it's like there used to be this notion, I'm sure some people still have this notion, but there was a notion, certainly when I was a child in the 90s, that if you work hard enough, then you're whatever. And lots of people have worked very hard and have all this skill. So it is a shame, obviously, that capitalism, but the thing is, this is the nature of capitalism, it generates value by sacrifice. All these people have sacrificed, have perfected their talents, and they're not being I don't even want to know that use the word used, but they aren't being made use of for their best direction. Capitalism always has to waste, it always has to exclude, all this kind of stuff. But it is interesting how the cope of this like collapsing industry, which has been collapsing gradually for a number of years, but it's very different to when I started, but the continued attempted cope to rationalize how it's still really fair and it's still a meritocracy. And it's funny because there's always these things like the Nepo baby was one of these, you know, it's a critique in a certain sense, because I do, in a certain sense, think we live in somewhat of an inheritocracy now. But, you know, again, it's like in blaming individuals and what are we going to do? Like there's 100 people who have very seen the film, you know, but it's very much the logic of like a contingent problem that if we fix this tiny thing, then it would be fine. And that's a very kind of puritanical, it's the same logic that marks like reactionary movements and all this kind of stuff. But it's still important to talk about that. That's one of the symptoms. But also there's things like, I won't go into it now, but in the UK, the governing body that was set up in a certain period of time to, you know, to support films from this country, because of the way that it has not understood how capitalism actually works, it's actually undermined. I mean, I've written an article about this, but this it's like a really big conversation. But it has also transformed the economy into a monopoly. And so when you are trying to get film funding, there's one source. So this also undermines it, because it can no longer be a meritocracy when you have, so you literally cannot pick. And it becomes often that the ideological foil is a certain set of righteous ideas, because that's generally what happens under capitalism and under lots of repressive regimes. They use things that were like the original emancipatory ideas of Jesus Christ become like reactionary, you know, white evangelicalism or something like that. But and it's all, you know, holy and good. And what tends to happen is it's people who are, you know, and this isn't to blame those individuals either, but like can afford to live at the center, can afford to pay for their own, you know, film productions that are of a certain standard, that happen to maybe have had the kind of education where they know how to navigate these sets of ideas. They've maybe not indoctrinated, but they've been educated out of a dialectical logic and into that, you know. And even though that, again, my dad calls it a self-licking lollipop, right? When you have a monopoly, it is a self-licking lollipop. So you have this funding, you have access to the market, which obviously people don't who can't make it in the first place. But also, you know, you have access to the market because you adhere to a certain like underlying current or perspective, and then the film gets bought because that's. But it's not a competition. It's a competitive. It's a highly competitive logic in that like. Everybody has been thrown by the wayside. There's a huge amount of waste and surplus value and stuff, but it's absolutely not meritocratic. And the more and more ridiculous it gets, the more competitive and unfair it gets, the more obvious it's no longer a meritocracy, because the copes start to outweigh the fact that you've wasted so many brilliant people along the way. And, you know, I'm not saying that people are entitled to be filmmakers or all this kind of thing. And I do know that like some people, you know, I very much think, you know, materials at the end of the day, like we should improve people's living conditions and stuff like that, but people should have the right to do art. But obviously our economic system does not permit an access to the market in a neutral way. But I sort of very much have come to a position where, you know, the making is the most important bit, and you're very lucky if people end up watching it. You know, and obviously it comes to life in the mind of the other, but like this sounds really maybe twee and a cope for myself and really whatever, but I don't want to romanticize it in any way. But it's like, if one, you know, what happens in the mind of one person is an infinite possibility. So it's always, sorry.
Really quick, we're officially out of time here, but before we close out, I'll give you both a moment to say your closing remarks. I hate to cut it short because, of course, there's so much here, and I'm getting really excited. But also, I got to take care of this internet problem. I'm going to restart my router. Nance will, for the first time ever in the history of us doing these things together, use the stream key and the URL to actually take over the stream from Phoenix. So it'll stop streaming from Boise. It'll start streaming from Phoenix. He will roll the PSA. So I'll probably start the PSA, and then he'll start streaming and I'll stop streaming, and then he will roll the PSA. I don't know if that's going to work. It'll be slightly janky and redundant. Oh, everybody bear with us. We've never done this kind of thing before. It's all an experiment with the medium. And then we'll be back with David Shields and his book about how he got here. Also a movie, How He Got Here, which is really cool because you're all talking about bringing ideas to life. He made a documentary, right? So it'll be a great springboard into that conversation. But all right, let's do the closeout here. I want to turn it over to Will and then Helen.
Yeah, so it's just been really great to talk to you, to be honest, because I found your films really, really inspiring. It kind of really helped me kind of think, no, there is a space for this. And, it's been really great to kind of like pick your brain about a few ideas here and there. And it's just been a really, really, really great talk. And I hope I can kind of feed some of this into the kind of because I'm making a film about time energy as well. It's kind of a bit about daily life. But things might change. But so hopefully I can kind of feed that into that as well. But it's been really great to meet you and
really great to meet you too. Like so great. And what I always find is like the most inspiring as like a maker is the community of other makers, like that you're not crazy, right? You've confronted this, and it isn't just because you are so often it's crazy making the way that the material conditions are in the industry is, and it's and also we're so siloed and in different places, and one of the internet, especially the commoditized internet, has so many drawbacks but also so many positives because we can talk to each other and stuff. But it's very much like, and I think it's really important and this is in a sense like, I don't know what organizing is now that like the way that labor is in our kind of like, how do we control supply chains? We can't really, but it is so important to like consciousness raise on this and to like actually and I don't mean in terms of like some Ponzi way of making films or whatever, but in terms of like the actual material conditions we're dealing with, and then that can maybe affect our work or not. But I do think it's really important to share experience, because it can become, when you think that you're the only one or that it's just happened to you, it's actually very, very difficult for people to cope with. So and it is a real tragedy because there's so many really brilliant people out there, films out there that do exist and that might exist. So yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, you two.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Cheerio.
Bye.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of the situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory. You've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Time Energy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first I had to get freed from wage labor, which was achieved this year. That's right. Thanks to my monthly seminar subscribers, I was able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. Now I'm announcing the next big phase of the plan, which is the Mikey Down Seminar. What monthly subscribers to the Mikey Seminar are paying for is a survey of philosophy, including deep dives into Žižek, Land, Lacan, Baudrillard, Bataille, Lyotard, and ultimately the whole history of philosophy.
We're trying to build like this ongoing seminar, right? And that's what I really like about this thing, where, you know, if I'm teaching a main text, that's something I got to focus on. I got to really, but the seminar thing, we can do this stuff all the time, where we dive deeper into concepts, we dive deeper into certain, you know, sections of books or whatever, and we can really do this nuanced stuff.
I think that there's probably no better way for us to accelerate our learning in these areas than by slipstreaming Mikey. And that has been my belief for years and years and years now. It's official. You're able to help out. You're able to get involved. You're able to benefit directly from liberating him from wage labor. Get on it right now. Do it. Just go. Stop what you're doing. Go click the button, subscribe. This is what you do. Subscribe to him. If you're already signed up for the ongoing Theory Underground seminars, then that's the ones that I do with my wife, Anne. Though that's getting an upgrade, which means that I will be doing one session per month that is just me, and then I will also be doing the ones with Anne, which are a crash course in sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and ultimately Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, imminently critiquing pop psychology, sociology, self-help, and ultimately the doxa of our time. But if you would like to be a subscriber to both Mikey's seminar and the seminar that the Snellgrove McKerrachers are doing, then the best way is to become a Tier 4 subscriber, or you can be a Tier 2 subscriber to each of us. The reason this matters is because Tier 2 is like pretty much the best bang for your buck. It gives you huge discounts on all of the courses that we do. But if you can't afford it, Tier 4 is amazing because it gives you Tier 3 access at both Mikey's seminar and ours.
Finally, not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff, so big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian, Tyler, and Mandeep, and all the other wonderful patron people. Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. Thank you so much to all of you patrons, and also to the special subscribers and the paying subscribers. Oh my god! It's just so awkward. Thank you, Patreon. Patrons. Thank you, okay. And to all the other wonderful patrons. Thank you so much, all you patrons. And also a special thanks to the subscribers on the YouTube side, as well as the paying subscribers over at Substack. Why can't we do this? Fuck. You guys. Please. Just thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this bullshit possible. Thank you to the subscribers. You did so good. Thanks, guys.